Really is. Be that good for you. Why?
She'd have to rescue us.
No.
Do you want to take one and pass this?
Okay. Would you kindly pass those out? Thank you. Thank you. Morning paperwork.
I had to make them for the posadas today.
Oh, yeah.
Sure, yeah.
Okay.
You have to run.
Yes, thank
No, I
you.
just wanted to grab one.
He passed. Okay. This?
Not yet.
Oh, this guy's the third.
Yeah, one here. Good.
I'm Lois's daughter.
Is this your first time here?
No.
No.
It's the,
Yeah.
Well,
she's from Pittsburgh.
well, okay. Well, when are you moving up here?
We're over. That's what it is.
I think it's Kim.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I guess that's where we moved
Is it?
over.
Yeah.
It's
Kim,
Yeah, no, Kim has
A little
10.
bit south.
Is there much difference when you think about Pittsburgh versus
That's awesome.
Illinois?
Oh, you mean football?
No, oh, no, nobody cares.
Yeah, nothing's really important.
Nothing.
This one.
You're enjoying your time at home?
This is where we've done before.
I'm Lois.
But this is the one that organized it. So you can mention that and just forgot out of the year.
I already went down. This is my dog.
Yeah, thank you, water, you know, and cookies.
I know. That could be better.
Well, good morning, everyone. I am Joanne. I heard you're Lois's daughter,
Yes,
so
Vicky.
welcome.
Thank you.
I needed my bulletin to introduce Nazish and Yusuf because we have such accomplished guests. I don't have everything memorized. But
Thanks.
so Nazish Yerkat, she's an author. It's written for 50 media outlets, including the Chicago Tribune, Public Radio International, National Public Radio on Being, Lean In, plenty. So we're very glad to have her. She's a small business owner, consults as a marketing communication strategist for nonprofits and small businesses. The founder of Writer's Studio. This is all in your bulletin.
Wow.
And she's had some distinguished students come from there too, who won national and international writing competitions. So she is a recipient of the Council of Islamic Organizations of Greater Chicago, Excellence in Community Service. So we are so pleased to have her, and she's joined by her son Yusuf, who is from Glenbard West and currently a McKern Fellow and undergraduate of Northern Illinois University. So both have spent many years here in the Glen Ellen area and have some great stories to share with us today that I'm very much looking forward to. And a friend. Okay, welcome, friends.
We should introduce ourselves
Yes.
briefly. We do that. And Nazish, as you're speaking, if you want to lower your mask so we can hear you better, you're welcome. You can do that, but it's up to you.
Sure.
Um,
I have my booster, so.
Should we go around and just, so you can
Sure.
know who's here?
Yes.
Josh, why don't you?
Yeah, I'm Josh O'Shea. I'm on the vestry here, which means kind of like some business stuff. I'm also a librarian here. And I know your friend Chris well enough. You keep him in the corner.
So I'm Joanne. We have corresponded a few times, so it's good to meet you in person. I'm one of the priest associates here at St. Mark's.
I'm Joyce Fletcher, and I've been at St. Mark's for about 20 years, and but I don't live in Glen Ellen. I live in Wheaton.
I'm with her, and I'm a retired philosophy professor as of this summer.
Right.
Judy?
Oh, I'm Judy Jackson, and I just moved here to Glen Ellen in August,
Welcome.
so I'm new to Glen Ellen and also to St. Mark's. Thank you for being here.
It's a nice thing for her. I'm in love with church.
I'm Liz Stryker. I'm a new member here, and I've lived in like Wheaton, Glen Ellen for about 2 years.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome, I'm Richard Borowski. I'm a relatively new member here, living just north of us.
Lots of new faces. Lovely.
I'm Lois Sheridan. I've been in the parish for about 5 years. And I came here from Wisconsin about 60 years ago.
Wow.
I live in Wheaton.
I'm Justine, and Nazish is my mom, and Yusuf is my brother.
Are you in Thunder? West? Are you in?
I graduated from U of I. I went to West too.
Okay.
I'm Vicki Sheridan. I am Lois's daughter, and I'm visiting from Pittsburgh.
I'm George Smith, and I'm the rector of St. Mark's, and I've been here for 15 plus years. I've known Nazish now for a long time, so it's still great to have, every time you're here, you bring joy. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
I'm Edna Hetherington. I've been here, I live nearby, and I've been to some of your presentations also.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Chris English. I'm a friend of Yusuf.
Yes, they're partners in crime.
And we have on Zoom a couple people. There's Kim Reed.
Good morning. Hey, Nazish. So great to see you, Yusuf and Maskeen, and so glad you guys are here. And it's great to see you. And I've known them for a long time, and I consider them my friends. Thank you for coming.
And there's Lindsay.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Lindsay, and I wish I could be there in person today, but we have so many things going on with our one car, so I just couldn't make it. But I have a degree in Christian Muslim relations, and I really just wish I could be there. But I've also been a member of St. Mark's for about 8 years now, and I'm glad you could be here today.
Lindsay, whatever mistakes I make, you can correct them.
No, I just wanted to express my interest and regret at not being able to be physically present. That's all.
Thank you, Lindsay. It looks like we have Judy Jackson. Hi, Judy. Oh, I think you're on mute.
I was trying to get the video going. Yeah, I'm Judy Jackson, and I was a member of St. Mark's for quite some time, and so I am in the area, and I come by when I can. I'm glad you're here.
And we're glad you're here with us too. And then there's Laura Waterman, who's hosting. You can say hi, Laura.
Hi, Laura.
There you go.
Hi, Laura. I'm Laura Waterman. I've been here about 3 years, and I'm very excited to hear this. And co-host is also me. It's just my other computer. So thank you.
So there you go. Those are some of the people who are here this morning.
So thank you again for having me, and Joanne for reaching out. I really appreciate this, and I love St. Mark's. So this is my third time back, third time back, and I always feel so welcomed and so loved even. So thank you again. I have some prepared remarks, but if I'm going too slow or you'd like to pause and ask questions, feel free. I spoke with Joanne earlier as to how she'd like me to structure the conversation. And it is going to be a conversation. And we had agreed that I'll talk about some of our religious backgrounds and then look for things that we might have common ground on. And then I'll talk about my personal experiences here in Glen Ellen. Is that okay? And of course,
yes,
Yusuf,
please.
wonderful. Yusuf would join me. So, Assalamu alaikum. And I believe that's the traditional greeting that's used by priests and pastors with their fellow congregants as a way to say goodbye at many churches. We use that as well. Assalamu alaikum, or in English, peace be with you. And the response is, And also with you, which is Walaikum Assalam in Arabic. I always like to start with that because I was at a service at Faith Lutheran, and this was for one of my friends who sings in the choir. And they used that after the whole the sermon was done. And I was amazed. I was really surprised to hear that. And I said, oh my goodness, such a basic fundamental thing as our greeting is the same. Of course, I'd known because I've lived in the Middle East that the Arabic word for God is Allah. And the Christians in the Arab world do say Allah instead of God. They use it interchangeably. So with that, I thank you for having me here. It's an honor, as always. And I'm here today so that we get to know each other, beyond our boundaries, beyond our stereotypes, beyond our headlines. And it's more urgent than ever before. I'd like to read a passage from scripture. O Mary, indeed God has chosen you, purified you, and chosen you above the women of the world. O Mary, be devoutly obedient to your Lord and prostrate and bow down along with those who bow down in prayer. And that's from the Quran, from a chapter dedicated to Mary, and the entire chapter is titled Mary. This guy Maryam is the Muslim name for Mary, just like Solomon is Suleiman, and Joseph is Yusuf, and Ishmael is Ishmael, I think, still, and Isaac is Ishaq. So they're the same names, but just depending on the region, spoken differently. And did that come as a surprise? That's the verse from the Quran. That's beautiful.
Absolutely.
Would you like me to share more about Mary at this point? All right. And when the angel said, O Mary, indeed Allah gives you good tidings of a word from him, whose name will be the Messiah, Jesus, the son of Mary, distinguished in this world and the hereafter, and among those brought near to Allah. He will speak to the people in the cradle, and in maturity he will be of the righteous. She said, My Lord, how will I have a child when no man has touched me? The angel, and this is Gabriel. I believe it is Gabriel. I could be wrong, and Lindsay can correct me. The angel said, Such is Allah. He creates what he wills. When he decrees a matter, he only says it to be. He only says be, and it is. And he will teach him writing, as in teach the Messiah writing, and wisdom, and the Torah, and the gospel, and make him a messenger to the children of Israel, he will say to them, Indeed, I have come to you with a sign from your Lord, in that I design for you from clay that which is like the form of a bird. Then I breathe into it, and it becomes a bird by permission of God. And I cure the blind and the leper, and I give life to the dead by permission of God. And I inform you of what you eat and what you store in your houses. Indeed, in that is a sign for you, if you are believers. And I have come confirming what was before me of the Torah, and to make lawful for you some of what was forbidden to you. And I have come to you with a sign from your Lord. So fear Allah and obey me, as it obey me, Jesus. Indeed, Allah is my Lord and your Lord, so worship him. That is the straight path. So all of this is still in the chapter devoted to Mary. Is this how it is in the Bible? Is this similar?
Very similar.
Similar, yeah. Very similar. Okay. And her story of her childbirth, what was that like in the Bible?
So in we have an account in Luke's gospel of this, and the angel Gabriel visits Mary and speaks to her, and many of the things are very similar.
Okay, wonderful. So she conceived him, and she withdrew with him to a remote place. And the pains of childbirth drove her to the trunk of a palm tree. She said, "Oh, I wish I had died before this and was in oblivion forgotten," because of how painful it was and how alone she was. There was just her. But he called her from below, "Do not grieve. Your Lord has provided beneath you a stream, and shake towards you the trunk of the palm tree. It will drop upon you ripe, fresh dates." So if you've seen a palm tree, it's thick. No way does that shaking gonna drop any, like if I or you did it. But for me, that signifies that God requires effort on our part, and He will do the rest. But the effort has to be ours. So for me, these aren't just stories. These are actually things I can use.
Can I ask, so does she have a husband?
No, it's an immaculate conception.
Yeah, but is there a husband, a foster?
Like Joseph,
No,
we have
no
Joseph in
Joseph.
our scripture.
No Joseph.
Yeah, there is no Joseph.
And she was alone. So in our
Yes.
scriptures,
Interesting,
there are
yeah.
animals and there are shepherds and all these kind
Oh,
of
there might have
visitors.
been animals. I don't know.
Yeah, okay.
But there were no people.
There were no people.
There were no
Wow,
people.
really? Boy, that's
Yeah.
rough.
Till they came to harass her after the baby.
They came to harass her?
Yeah, because they said you were immoral. How did you have the baby
Oh,
without a,
Yeah.
you know?
Sure.
So in that context. So yes.
No, this sounds to me is like, with Ishmael's,
Hagar.
with Hagar,
Yeah.
being pushed out of the family, going out into the desert,
By herself.
having a child by herself,
Yeah.
being abandoned, but God provides, one or two things to sustain her. So that's what that reminds me of.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Oh, I see.
That'd change our nativity scenes, wouldn't it?
Uh-huh. Yeah.
I like the palm
The three wise
Palm
men
tree,
come to
yeah.
visit her. You know, that I think the three wise men are part of the story.
Mhm. Oh, they are.
Yeah, at some point. So for me, the story was about effort is important. God, like you row and God will send the winds. But we are required to strive in His path. Praying is good. Hoping alone is not the answer. And so you want to create what you want. That's my takeaway. Now, and he says, so eat and drink and be contented. And if you see from among humanity anyone, this is when she's in seclusion, say, indeed, I have vowed to the most merciful absentation, so I will not speak to any man today. And then afterwards, when she has her baby, she brings them to the people, carrying him. And the people said to her, "O Mary, you have certainly done a thing unprecedented. O sister of Aaron, your father was not a man of evil, nor was your mother unchaste." So they are basically putting her down. So she pointed to him, the baby. They said, "How can we speak to one who is in the cradle, a child?" Referring to Jesus. And Jesus says, "Indeed, I am the servant of God. He has given me the scripture and made me a prophet. And He has made me blessed wherever I am and has enjoined upon me prayer and zakat," which is like charity. And it's in Judaism, there's a word sadaqa, which is like, do you know the exact word?
What is it? Sadika?
It's very similar to our
Very
sadaqa,
similar,
as
It's
long
like
as I remember.
acts of charity.
Yes, but it's the same word actually. Sadaqa, I think they say the emphasis is a little bit different. So we say sadaqa, as long as I remain alive. So this is Jesus talking. So here I am today, hoping that we get to know each other beyond the stereotypes, beyond the headlines, and make this an opportunity for dialogue and whatever questions you might have. Should I turn it to Yusuf or should I break for questions? How would you like it?
You will follow your lead.
Yeah.
Well, let me just make a comment, and I think that, so I would say, and it's hard to speak on behalf of a community, right? Because what I see is there's very, very, very little understanding of what Islam is, right? And very few Christians would have any idea that that is a part of, you know, the Quran, this part about Mary. I would think very few understand that, and let alone the differences as well. So there's just a lack of information, and I don't even know if it's interest as well. It could be that. But anyway, that's
Well, they
just
don't know what they don't know. I mean, so it's hard to get interested until you know something, right?
Exactly.
You don't know anything, why would you be interested?
Right.
I think to a large extent too, when something like, for example, sometimes I get surprised at like when like
Take your mask off.
I can keep it on if that's all
Yeah,
right.
you can if you want.
But I think sometimes when an issue affects people to such a little degree, so for example, if some Muslim person is getting stopped at TSA, or even in the cases of like police brutality, it seems like how can people not care about those issues when they're so severe? And I think I was talking to one of my friends about it, and they were just explaining to me that's just the extent of privilege that some people have. That if an issue affects you to such a minimal amount, you don't even think about looking into it. And I think that's one thing to keep in mind with issues that affect Muslims, issues that affect other minorities in the US, specifically these acts of police brutality. It's important to recognize that degree of privilege that even us, especially with like, because police brutality isn't really an issue that affects Muslims specifically in the US. So I think that's something to recognize, that in different aspects, we have these levels of privilege that, I mean, it's okay for us to be ignorant about these things sometimes. It's not actually acceptable, but since it just doesn't affect us to any extent, we tend to be ignorant about those things. But I think the thing is to recognize, obviously, like you're saying, that these issues do affect people. They're important parts of people's identities, which is why it's important for us, even though it doesn't affect us, to get to know about it. But I think that's interesting that you brought that up.
So,
Really good point.
the backstory, I'm just like, I know, Josh mentioned the story of Sarah and Hagar, right? So in our stories, Abraham was married to Hagar first. He was married to Sarah first. She couldn't have a child, and she became really, really, really old. She was in her 90s, and Abraham was old too, but they never gave up hope, and they kept praying. And then she gives Hagar to him, and in marriage. And when she conceives a child, she becomes jealous of her, and then she says, please leave her in the desert. And Abraham also receives a message from God that take Hagar and leave her in the desert. And she at that time has a baby, who we believe is Ishmael. And the children of Ishmael are the Muslims. And by then, Hagar also conceives, and she has Isaac. And the children of Isaac are the Jews. So we are cousins. And then in the lineage, that's how Mary is cousins with John the Baptist, or niece, I think. I don't know. I think she's...
So Mary and Elizabeth are cousins, theoretically. And then so John the Baptist and Jesus are cousins.
Yes, correct. So something like this. They're related, they're from the similar tree. So the three Abrahamic faiths were one of the three. So we believe that Prophet Muhammad was the last of that lineage. Joseph is there. Who else? Jonas is there. So there are lots and lots of the similar. Noah is there. Abraham, of course. So the lots of the prophets are the same. And the last, we believe, is Prophet Muhammad. Peace be upon him. So again, I'll let Yusuf talk to his experiences, and then we can always go back. And for me, the whole thing with I keep saying I'll give it back to Yusuf, but I had one more. Is that our main holiday, the Eid holiday, which is during the Hajj, is a commemoration of Abraham's willingness to sacrifice his son, and then God replaces him the ram. Imagine, for me, the takeaway is this is a child he's gotten after years and years and decades of praying. In his feeble old age, he's asked to sacrifice him by God for, and such a precious child. Can you imagine if you waited decades for this child? and he's willing to listen. And it's just a test. So for me, hardships, and I keep telling myself, I just turned 50, is that all our life, our hardships are tests, our blessings are tests. What do we do with them? Do we spread the joy when things are going good? And when things are going bad, do we still give thanks? And that's the story of Abraham, how I use it. And then the Eid holiday, we also cut a lamb to commemorate that willingness of Abraham. And we give a third of that lamb in charity, a third to family and friends, and a third we keep for our family. So we give our donation overseas because there's so many poor people. But a lot of times people will go to the farm here, they go to Wisconsin or southern Illinois, they'll actually slaughter it. And when we cut it, we say in the name of God. So it's blessed, much like kosher. It's called halal. And we eat, many of us will not eat pork, and then we'll also eat only blessed meat. So then we go to the Indian store and we'll buy the meat that's blessed. So that's just for the background and the whole connection with, and that's during Hajj, our major pilgrimage. So it just shows our ties to Abraham he's so central to the faith. That one of our main holidays is based on his tribulations. If you have any questions, I can take them. Otherwise, you say, yeah?
Yeah, a lot of the work that I'm involved with it's very involved with interfaith and intercultural dialogue. So, for example, at my school, I'm really involved with the Asian American Resource Center, and we talk a lot about Asian identity. And I feel like, and then like disclaimer too, we happen to be Indian and Muslim too. So our perspective is obviously a little bit different than someone who might be like Pakistani and Muslim, or someone who's Egyptian and Muslim, or someone who's from the US and Muslim. So I think that's one thing that I feel like a lot of people don't immediately realize is that Muslims don't just look like us, they look like people of all races and all ethnicities. And I feel like that's something that a lot of people won't recognize. For example, like in our family, we have cousins who are white and they are Muslim, and it's kind of funny because we go out with them and sometimes people get a little bit confused or will be like our cousins will like start talking like Arabic, or they'll say like Assalamu alaikum, or like someone will say like Assalamu alaikum to me and then they'll turn to my cousin and be like, oh hi, nice to meet you. So it's on Muslim side too. Even sometimes we don't recognize that like the way Muslims look, it's very varied because it's a faith, it's not a cultural practice, it's not specific to any region, it's not specific to any identity of people, it's a religion, same as Christianity. The same way any Christian can look any way, any Muslim can look any way. So I feel like that's one interesting thing to recognize. And I think one thing that I wanted to touch on a little bit was, so personally for me and Chris, we were actually both at Glenbard West. Saskeen was at Glenbard West, and Glenbard West, very amazing school district. I'm very glad that it prepared me academically. I'm very glad that I feel like going into college, I had that experience. I had lots of supportive teachers, lots of supportive faculty. But I think one thing that we saw at our school district that you see in workplaces and just overall in general is a lot of people are really scared to have conversations like these. They feel like, some people just feel like it's hard to address those differences. Some people just feel like the topics are too serious. And I think one is the consequences of not having the conversations like these are so severe that you realize the value of having conversations. There's literal countries where like people are killing each other over their faith, and even other issues related to race where you have people killing each other over your race. So I feel like at some point you have to get over that discomfort of having conversations like these where you're saying, oh, we're different than you and I'm different than you. And you have to recognize that the consequences for not having those conversations are so severe that conversations like these are necessary. And I think, especially in like an academic setting or a workplace setting, because just to make it I know for me, I always talk about it in an academic setting because I'm in college, I'm in school, but even in a workplace setting, a lot of the offices, they're scared to recognize where their shortcomings are in these different aspects, right? It's hard for a business to admit whoa, we messed up, where we had this case of discrimination. Or for Glenbard West, it's a little hard to admit, oh, we're not necessarily giving the same resources to students of color and minority students. And for a school to not, it's hard for them to admit that. It's hard for them to say, hey, let's have this conversation where we're gonna allow our students of color to have this voice expressing their being critical of the school, right? Because that's embarrassing. No one wants to admit we're not having these same resources. So I think one really great thing that I saw at my current college, Northern Illinois University, that was really meaningful for me was we were having this, it was the Asian American Association, Asian American students were speaking with President Lisa Freeman, which is the president of our university. This was following, there was acts of hate against Asians in Georgia. So this was following those events. We were talking to the president of our university. We were kind of thinking of ways that the university could step up or where those shortcomings were. And to me personally, it just meant a lot that she said there were shortcomings, because a lot of people aren't even willing to recognize where the shortcomings are. So, but it's kind of funny because that's actually like a very little thing to be able to recognize that, oh, we've made these mistakes and we're not giving the resources where they need to be going. So I think it's interesting that that was a really small thing and it meant a lot to me. But in the grand scheme of things, recognizing your mistake isn't necessarily, that's not anywhere near a solution. I think it's the start of a solution, and it meant a lot to me to be able to recognize that mistake and admit it in front of 20 other students. But I think it's not a solution yet. And I think one thing is, with a lot of these conversations that we're having now, they're long overdue. Like, we're behind track. Like I was saying, there's cases of discrimination. At TSA, Muslims are stopped at TSA. I think if you say how many times we go to the airport, 9 out of 10 times at TSA, we're gonna get randomly selected for our luggage to be checked. It's randomly selected though, right? So, I mean, and then even like issues with police brutality, like I mentioned before, like it's overdue. These conversations are long overdue. So it's like, I think sometimes I get overly frustrated where it's like these conversations are long overdue. But that doesn't mean they're not necessary. It doesn't mean it's too late, but it does mean they're long overdue. And it means the rate that we have to have these conversations and have to be like actionable allies, that needs to be happening at a very fast rate to compensate for how long overdue these conversations are. That was a little bit all over the place, but I feel like the main things that I was trying to touch on where, yeah, these conversations are scary, but they're needed. It's hard to say I'm different than you and you're different than me, and we're going to celebrate those differences. And I think that's one thing too, that a lot of, like when we first started doing these interfaith conversations, maybe like 5 years ago, I started getting involved with it, maybe more like 10 years ago. I'd like attend these things and it'd be like, oh, we're all similar. Look, this is what Christians have in common. This is what Muslims have in common. This is what Jews have in common. And it's cool to recognize the similarities, but there are big differences, and there's tiny differences too. But I think the fact is that you got to recognize that you got to celebrate the differences. It's not just about recognizing what we have in common, because we are different, and it's about celebrating those differences too, and recognizing what makes people unique, and recognizing that that has it contributes when people are diverse, when people are different from each other. There's a large amount. I mean, it adds value to society when people are different and unique. Yeah, so I think that was a little bit all over the place, but yeah.
Have you gone back to Glenbard West?
I haven't.
Tried to have any conversations?
Yeah, so that's actually something we're really involved with. So even while I was at West, so we would organize. So this is something Chris and I actually did freshman year as part of a project we were working on. Is we did like a Q&A session where we invited a speaker in to talk about Islam. So, I have a lot of love for Glenbard West. I'm not trying to like bash, but I do think there is room for growth, obviously. But so we invited the speaker, and initially when we proposed the idea, the school was pretty hesitant. Like the immediate reaction from like the administrator that we brought it up to was to downsize it, and it just wasn't a very positive reaction to having these conversations. And I don't necessarily think it's that individual administrator. I think just the community we live in, the school's really scared. Like part of the reason they're scared to have conversations like these is because they're scared of the surrounding community. They're scared of like parents' reactions, because yeah. Yeah.
Non-Muslim parents.
Yeah.
The first one that we tried to organize, there was already an MSA in the school. They didn't want it outside of an MSA meeting. This big event, this big Q&A thing, they wanted that within a MSA meeting.
MSA being Muslim students.
Yeah, sorry.
So only the MSA students would be able to be there?
Other people would be encouraged, but like.
But we couldn't host it in like the auditorium, or we couldn't host it as like
You have
a.
to tell us what MSA is.
Yeah, MSA is Muslim Student Association.
Okay.
So across clubs and across colleges and high schools, they have these Muslim student associations, and it's just like kind of like a club for like Christian athletes, or like a so we had an MSA, and I think that's one thing that's cool. Like Lombard West, a lot of schools don't have an Asian club. A lot of schools don't have a Muslim Student Association. Don't have like a Lombard Latino organization. So it's really cool that we have these different clubs. The problem is, it's great that you have this diversity. It's great that you have these clubs, but when you don't have conversation across these clubs, or the opportunity for these clubs to present publicly in front of the whole school, I don't want to say it's useless, but it's great, because I like that I get to meet other people who are similar values, similar identities with me. But if I don't get to express that with everybody in an open forum, then it doesn't allow for the growth.
Yeah.
And I think there's a difference between being like, oh, that's cool that you have your own unique identity. Here's your club, go stay in your corner, go do your own thing, versus being like, oh, you have your unique identity, we want to celebrate it too. And I think there's a lot of super passionate students that I met that really care about their culture, care about their identity, care about diversity. But it also takes the administration coming in too and saying, we support your identity too, and we're going to give you that platform. So I feel like that's where the lacking was, where you had these super passionate, you had individual faculty who are super passionate, you had individual students who are super passionate, but you really, in all school settings, and even in work setting, you need these administrators to come in too and say, okay, we're going to give you that platform to express your voice, to express the issues that matter to you. But going back to your question, so we did organize an event at West where we had a Q&A session about Islam. So we brought in a speaker, and I think 30 or 40 kids attended, and it was a really good time. Honestly, it made me feel happy that there are so many students who are interested in learning about Islam. The thing that's a struggle is when it's all student led, because it's hard. It's nice to know that your faculty and administrators are also backing you up in these endeavors to express your identity. But like I'm saying, I think in a lot of workplaces, a lot of school settings too, they're scared to have these conversations. Specifically in Glen Ellen, it's because of people are scared of what the parents might react. And I think that kind of comes on us too, to express to these schools and in these workplaces that these conversations are really important to us, and they're going to have these impact, because there's other people who are writing letters to the school saying, no, we don't want these conversations. Right?
Showing up the school boards. And
Exactly. Yeah. So for example, exactly. Because there's people writing emails to the superintendent expressing their discontent with issues of race being discussed. There's people writing those emails to the superintendent. There's people publishing news articles saying that they think conversations like these aren't necessary in a school place, right? So I think that so there is a value in having these conversations, which is why we got invited out today. And I think writing to the school and letting them know, oh, you hosted this event, we are in support of that event. And I think that there's some responsibility on us, because there are people on the other side saying, no, we don't want to have these conversations. But like I said, at this point, the consequences and severity of not having these conversations, it's so severe that it's really, there's not enough room to not have these conversations anymore.
No, I'll give an example. I think it was Taskeen or Yusuf, the history teacher said, when they were teaching history and they looked at, this is your story or Yusuf's? They looked at Islamic history, and then they looked at, and this was, I don't know what period, and the parents called and complained. They said, why is it longer than Christian history during that specific period? And this must have been just before the Crusades, or some portion where there was a lot of activity in the Islamic world. And the teacher said, because there was more going on in the Islamic world. So if you have things like that, and this is high school where you're supposed to be thinking critically, right?
Yeah.
So when you have something like that, what are the teachers going to do? They're not going to take on more battles than they need to.
Yeah.
So the
Right.
community
Yeah.
really has to be in support of that. My kids went to Lincoln. One of the things the school was beautiful about at Lincoln, because it has so many Muslim kids, is that they accommodated parents if they didn't want to do Halloween. So those kids would do arts and crafts instead. It was an option. My kids did. They went to all the parades, and I loved the parades. I loved Halloween. You know, I used to go and watch other people's children after my kids left elementary school. So it depends on where you are. Also, it doesn't make me like, this is my interpretation of my faith, right? But the school was very accommodating, and then during Eid, I would ask the librarian, what are some picture books featuring Muslim kids in it? Because kids need to see themselves.
Sure.
So then she'd give me a list of picture books that were not faith oriented, but they had Muslim characters, whether they were refugees, whether they were immigrants, whatever the case might be. And we purchased them. All Muslim parents, we pooled our money together, and that was our gift to the school. So Lincoln, for me, was very, very nice. But like the scheme will tell you, when she was in high school, with her, do you want to tell the story of Ramadan and how?
So I was just talking to my mom.
You want to take your mask off?
I had great friends in high school. I think we were pretty open, but I also don't think any of them knew that I fasted during Ramadan. They're just like, oh, that's just not something that we talked about, how, like, what I'm doing in my religion.
And you didn't feel comfortable just bringing that up at all because they just weren't interested? And
I don't think they ever said, like, no one ever said anything negative that would make me not want to share, but it just wasn't something that we talked about, I guess.
Nobody was curious to, like, you know, tell me about it or why you do it? Or...
Maybe it didn't overlap with the school year in those 4 years, so they weren't like, why aren't you eating lunch? But I mean, they must have known that I took a day off school for Eid, and I don't think anyone asked, which maybe I could have done more to share also on my end, but it's just a observation I realized.
So, like I said, I'm a librarian here, and one of my volunteers for a long time, who's also Indian and Muslim, and he's brought up that a couple times. But he and I worked together for a couple of months, and then maybe you late night study where we had pizza,
Yeah.
right? Okay, so he and I had worked together a few times. Sufyan?
I haven't met him, but
Okay, yeah. So anyway, but because we worked together a few times, he came up to me and said, hey, I know this is weird, but can you hold this pizza until it gets dark? And I was like, that's weird. Heck yes, I can. But it took that relationship a little bit of like, and I was like very clear about, you know, if you have something to ask me, that's my job. I want to get to know you, even if you feel weird about anything, you know. But I was the authority figure at that part, and it felt both exciting and my responsibility to make sure that any kid could come up and say whatever they want or any question. That was my responsibility and my job. And then he was like, can you hold this pizza? And I was like, you got any friends who need some help? So, but I went out of that way because that was my responsibility. I'm not going to put that on some high schooler who's here. Be like, hey, raise your hand. Who feels awkward about this? Like, whatever, you know, yeah.
No, I remember too, because I did come and study with Chris one day, and I remember you saving the pizza for me, and you're like, oh, I can just hold it till later, so I appreciate that too.
Yeah, awesome, good.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I think, so I feel like the reason too that we're so focused on like a school setting too is because, for example, Glenbard West has 2,400 people. Northern Illinois University has like 12,000 students. University of Illinois has 30,000 people. There's never a point in your life where you're going to be interacting with so many people and such a diverse array of people. That's why we're so focused on saying like that's why it needs to be somehow present in the school setting where you're having these conversations, because you're really not going to have that level of diversity any other point in your life. For example, like I'm sure at your current workplaces, I'm sure they're pretty homogenous, I would say.
I was just going to say that I was at College of DuPage. I worked at College of DuPage. I'm retired now. But 4 years ago, there were very, very few Muslim students at College of DuPage. And so, I think it takes a while for people to kind of recognize, we need to address the people who are here and have those conversations. But I think you're right. A school setting is the best place for that to occur, but we need to find ways for broader conversations as well.
Yeah, so I think because I feel like the reason, like there's a lot of people who will just say, oh, a school is not the right place to have these conversations. So that's kind of why I'm saying that you're never going to get this level of diversity again in your life. And also, if you're trying to prepare people to be like actionable allies for the rest of their life, you kind of have to catch them early, right? So if
if not there, where? Right?
Yeah, exactly. So I feel like so that's really, because sometimes I feel like that's a big concern people have, where they're just like, that's just not a topic for school, it's too serious, or it's going to cause too many problems. So so
then it's too late.
Yeah, exactly. After that,
then
it's
the
too
lines
late.
are drawn and it's hostile instead of open.
Exactly.
Not a place for learning.
Can I just add, I think schools certainly are appropriate, libraries are appropriate, but faith communities, and the fact that for so long, Yusuf and Nazish and Taskeen, you guys have been willing to go into these, like Christian churches and talk about your faith to try to help educate all of us about their religion and to celebrate, what we have in common, and Yusuf, what you said, like what is also different. But I just want to put a little reminder out there. This is, I think, back in the fall of 2015, when Taskeen was selling baked goods in the narthex at St. Mark's. And I think it was for bridge communities. I think Sleep Out Saturday was coming up and stuff. And Nazish first came to St. Mark's because she was so grateful that St. Mark's welcomed her daughter into, at our church. And that's how Nazish, became, kind of a friend of our faith, our church community. And I was texting with Joanne. There's a beautiful framed print on the top shelf in the library behind George, where the menorah is. That was a gift from Nazish. It was a Christmas gift to us at St. Mark's for being kind and welcoming. And it was at a time when I believe there was an incident where a woman, a Muslim woman in Chicago, was on a bus and someone spit at her. It was a really tense time, one of the many, unfortunately, tense times in our history where there was a very active anti-Muslim, I don't want to say movement, but behavior. But since then, Nazish has, she's come and spoken at the pulpit. She's been at Adult Ed, and Yusuf and Taskeen continue to always be out there in the community. So I just wanted to provide that. So thank you, guys.
Yeah, Taskeen actually will tell you. Do you remember that incident when you came and told me about the sermon? Do you remember?
I don't.
Okay. So they were here selling.
Don't forget George's sermon.
But not yours.
So they were selling cookies for Sleep Out Saturday, and they've done Sleep Out Saturday year after year after year, here. And Taskeen overheard the sermon because she was right outside, and they were talking about this spitting incident. And Reverend
That's fine.
George.
Yeah, that's good.
He actually said, this is the second sermon of the day. So they said that that was not good, that was wrong. And Taskeen said, Mummy, this is what they said. And she was so happy that someone stood up for a Muslim. And that's when I said, oh my goodness, I have to come and say thank you. And that's how our relationship actually started. And of course, that they made her feel at home. She was here with friends who worshipped here, right?
I don't think the group that I was with came here, but the Delaney's. I think that's that's how we.
But you were selling cookies with them, right?
Yeah, I think that's how we found Sleep Out Saturday as somewhere that we can do here through their family.
Yeah.
And Lauren Glavin too, I think, Tuskeen.
Yeah, Lauren also.
Yeah. So that's just, yes, go ahead.
I have a question, kind of for you, Seth, and also for you, about, like you said, school is such a great place to have these conversations, and I agree. And now I'm retired from College of DuPage, and where do I go to have more interfaith communications and conversations? I mean, I think that it is important for that to continue. And how do we get that going, or is it going and I just don't know about it?
Pizza and Social Justice, the Baha'i group. Yeah, they've been
Theosophists
meeting
too,
here.
as far as that goes.
Pardon me?
Theosophists, they're universalists and they'll welcome everybody.
But I think what Joyce is saying is
I'm saying
specific.
intentional
Are
conversations.
there ways to say, let us,
Yeah.
Part of it is not just learning about Islam, right?
No.
I mean, that's information is one thing, it's relationships.
Relationships, getting to
that-
know people.
That changes things, right? I mean, when you start to get to know somebody and then Eid makes sense. Like, I mean, I know you're fasting because I know you. But if I just have this dump of information about a religion, it's kind of like, okay, there's that. It's kind of cold and informational as opposed to a person, right? And so, I mean, I think our society here, I mean, and this community, I mean, there's a lot of anger behind the scenes, and I know this stuff about the schools, and we can't let that control us. I mean, we ultimately have to move forward and believe in relationship, that is going to save us. But there's a lot of fear. And I'm going to blame a lot of the Christian churches because, they are afraid of Islam, and some of their teaching is about that. And it's very distressing to me as a Christian that there is, I mean, a lot of the intolerance is coming from the Christian world. And so we have work to do just among Christians, but it's very hard because there is a very deep commitment to exclusivity and a reading and a perspective that to me is 180 from where I am. So that's part of the the Christian community is very diverse too. We are not on the same page on a lot of things.
Yeah. And going back to my point too, I don't think school setting is obviously not the only setting. I think it's the setting that I focus the most on because I'm in a school setting, and I think it's the easiest way to get a big group of people to educate them all at one time. But I do think there are those opportunities for conversation, like even your everyday work. If you see someone like praying, I think sometimes just asking them, oh, what were you doing that day? Obviously in a respectful way, not in a way to make them feel like what they're doing is odd. But I think it's these little conversations, or if you see someone wearing a hijab, maybe you say, oh, I went to this thing last week at my church where we talked about Islam a little bit. And I think it's really, and you start a conversation that way. So I think those every little day conversations too. And I think also a lot of Muslims are at the point too, where if you ask them a question, they're going to be excited to talk about it. It's not going to make them feel uncomfortable because one, everybody likes talking about themselves, and two, I think if you're being misunderstood for so long, the chance to explain yourself to someone and for someone to really be invested in what you like, your identity, I think someone's going to be beyond happy to share. So I think sometimes it's just those little conversations where you see someone and you just ask them a question. I think you can have that dialogue. But also mosques, they host like open mosque where you go into the mosque. They have like similar to this pretty much, and they have those events and you can attend those And there's tons of organizations, I think Josh was mentioning too, that are really focused on interfaith work as well. But I think on even a super tiny little scale, it starts off with just asking people those questions and really wanting to get to know other people.
Back to the relationships, the one-on-one.
Exactly, yeah.
Did you were gonna say something a little while back, did that? bring that up?
I was just saying, so schools are a great place, so are hospitals and professional organizations. Sometimes being in a relationship is as simple as saying, I know it's a holiday for you today, so what can I do to support you? One of the things, we've had long-standing relationships with Muslim colleagues that we will take days off for one another. And so I often will take Eid off, or I will work Eid while someone will work Easter for me. And it's simple as that. I know you're fasting today, or it's one of your times of prayer. Give me your picture. Let's switch. So, things like that.
So I have to pause here for a second. So for those on Zoom, you know that when it gets to be 10 o'clock, we have to end the Zoom portion. Here, this could continue for a little bit more. But I have to get that set up, but I just want to thank you.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, thank you
for
so
being
much.
here.
Thank you so much for having us, and for Kim for contributing that beautiful memory.
Well, thank you guys so much for being here.
Thank you.
I feel like just scratch the surface here, but there are opportunities, and I like, what Joyce says, how do we continue to build relationships and have things, it's going to take many things, right? So how are there ways to get interfaith people together? And St. Mark's, we can do that. We want to do that. So maybe we'll work on something together.
Yeah,
if that's at all interesting to you. I know you're not busy.
And George, just a quick plug.
Yusuf, I really like what you're saying in terms of when you're interacting with people, but I would like to see something intentional.
Yeah, like COD. COD has a Muslim Student Association.
Right.
Maybe that means having St. Mark's and COD, Muslim Student Association, pizza dinner and stuff like that.
A quick plug for DuPage United. St. Mark's is a part of DuPage United, and we work with other communities of faith. And there are a lot of Muslims who participate in DuPage United. In fact, Nazish was very involved when she was with ICNA Relief. And so that is a way that if any of you sitting in this room right now want to start having, intentional relationships with other people of other faith, start, join with us and working with DuPage United. It's easy. It's an easy step.
I was going to say the same. DuPage United works for systemic change, and the issues we pick bubble up from the society. Like, what are the things we want to coalesce around, and then initiate dialogue with our politicians and movers and shakers. So thank you, Kim, again.
Thank you.
Thank you, Zoom people.